Welcome back to our series on effective feedback. I'm really pleased to be joined by Jen Williams today. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Ramya.
Now, Jen, your department has been trialling some really cool work on sample marking as an approach to feedback. So to start us off, can you just outline what you've been doing and the rationale for it?
Yeah, so sample marking came to us as an idea in the summer. It was actually something that Georgina and Andrea brought to us because of something that you were actually doing in geography. We thought about sample marking as a way to think about how we could improve marking and feedback for both students and colleagues for the English department. Marking English is onerous. It takes a very long time. And we wanted to try and move towards something that was more purposeful. So we saw sample marking really as an opportunity, especially with the new marking policy, that would give us an opportunity to really think more consciously about what it is that we are marking, why we're marking it, and how we could use our marking to drive meaningful feedback forward. Often, I guess, previously, when you're just marking a whole set of books, maybe that wholesale marking is just about doing the motions, completing the motions, just getting it done. Whereas if you're thinking about your sample, you've got to think about who's in your sample. Are you going to mark your PP, your higher ability? In our mixed ability groups, it means that if we take a holistic sample of our key cohorts and mark 10 books, for example, you get a really good understanding about misconceptions that then allows us to inform our teaching. Whereas perhaps if you were marking just a whole set of books, you're just marking a whole set of books. So this was an opportunity for us to try with Year 9 as a group, a cohort that required 2 pieces per half term. But again, an opportunity to think about how we could benefit students and teachers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And something that keeps coming up across this whole series is this idea of finding the optimum ratio between workload and impact. And so it sounds like sample marking works quite well as part of that like shift towards smarter feedback rather than just like more feedback and getting that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things for us as a department, because if you think carefully about your sample, not only are you thinking about meaningful feedback for the mass or the whole, you're also having to tie into curriculum, you're having to tie into wider considerations around assessment. So it really did provide us as a department with an opportunity to think about how we can maximize those marking opportunities.
Yeah, that's nice. And it's almost like an opportunity there to be quite intentional with what you're doing with marking. Are there any considerations you've had to take while implementing this or things you've had to amend along the way?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that came out of our department meeting when we talked things through as a team was this idea that if we move towards sample marking, how will the students whose books perhaps haven't been marked feel? So, you sample mark 10, you've really thought through your key cohorts in that sample. You're basing your feedback on what the sample have done. They've got some sort of mark or they've got some sort of acknowledgement, but the 20 others in the room maybe haven't received that feedback. And a lot of us were quite conscious of students feeling like their work wasn't being looked at. So one of the things that we've had to think quite carefully about is how we balance live marking with sample marking, because live marking therefore fills those gaps. But that means that you as a classroom teacher have to be more considered with your live marking, because if you know that your sample is these 10, then you've got to try your best to get round those 20 in the week. So in some senses, it's made things much easier and much more productive in terms of our marking and meaningful marking. But those considerations that you have to make mean that you have to think differently, which then requires time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that idea of a shift in culture is such an important consideration to take, because I guess for many years students have like internalized this idea that feedback is synonymous with personalized written comments. So I guess if that what's quite a visible artifact is going to disappear, then actually that's going to be quite disorientating at first.
Exactly.
And we've got to almost like reframe that narrative and change that for our students.
It requires training I think. And like I said, this year we've started it as a bit of a trial. And when we review it in the summer and then thinking about September 26, we'll be able to think more about establishing that culture. Students will have had a year of us trialing live marking with sample marking, and then hopefully they will understand the benefits of both. I genuinely do feel that our move towards live marking is making feedback better. On the whole, they're getting more feedback, I think, than less. And I think sample marking is making us more purposeful in our learner response, because you're taking a sample, you're marking a sample, but you're using this sample to influence your understanding of how learning has happened. And all of those considerations, I think, are so much more conscious with this move towards sample marking in year 9. So hopefully on evaluation, we'll be able to think about how we can move it forward for everybody in the room.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like the strategy really shows how the importance of feedback and its impact on learning is what makes it work rather than the form it takes.
Exactly.
Thank you for talking through those. If you can give staff one takeaway from today's conversation, what would it be?
It would be that we all have different marking policies. So we're all marking within different guidelines from our heads of department. But even if you haven't trialed sample marking yet, one thing that you might want to consider is dividing your exercise books into groups. If you've got a class of 30, you might divide your books into sets of 10, where you've got a sample with key codes, so PP, White British, Black Caribbean. You've got groups of 10 where you've considered the sample, and then it allows you to do some comparative judgment across your groups of 10. Because even if sample marking isn't something you're trialing as a department, I think being conscious of a conscious sample within your marking can then, I think, lead to more purposeful, considered feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really valuable takeaway for everybody to hold on to. Thanks so much for speaking to me today and for sharing your insight. Before we finish, I just want to emphasise that every teacher has something important to contribute. This platform is here to showcase as many voices as possible. So if you'd like to take part or get involved, please get in touch with a member of the Learning and Teaching team.